The Sacred Union podcast is an epic deep dive into humanity's purpose at this time of planetary change, into the union of soul and body and what it means to truly live from soul. It is about the union of masculine and feminine and patriarchy and matriarchy into a partnership culture. It is more than just a podcast. It is an experience, a transmission, an intimate meeting with people who are creating the more beautiful world our souls know is possible. Welcome to the Sacred Union podcast. I have the honor to be your host. I'm Bibi Gratzer, and I am inviting you to join me on a journey into a deeper exploration of why we are here. Why does humanity exist? Why are you here at this time right now? That's essentially at the heart of all the themes and explorations that I'm inviting you into. And that's not a small question, especially in the face of a planetary crisis that we live in. And so, first of all, I would love to share a little bit more about the words sacred union and what that really means to me. So sacred union in the ancient tantric traditions often refers to the lovemaking between a man and a woman in a very sacred, merging, becoming one kind of way. And also often we refer to a sacred relationship as a sacred union partnership. And that kind of moves into the direction that I'm inviting you into, but it's so much bigger for me. Because for me, really, there's also the sacred union between love and body, love and matter, or divine consciousness and the material world. So it's also a union between soul and body, or spirit and body. And in that there's already, I think, a lot of the reasons of why we are here in that way of what does it really look like to bring higher frequencies, like pure love, all the way into the difficult, darkest places of Earth, of the human experience, of nature that we are part of. And I really believe in order to bring that love, we need a new paradigm, a new political system, a new governance on Earth. And I really believe that needs to be or move beyond the patriarchal systems, especially the unhealthy version of patriarchy that we live in right now, a domination culture. And also needs to move beyond matriarchal cultures. I actually want to slow down here just for a moment and define unhealthy and matriarchy and unhealthy patriarchy. So in some way there are two sides of the same coin, and they're both domination or power over cultures. Patriarchy has taught us, from thousands of years ago, from the Bible, that Eve was seduced by the snake, and thus they both were rejected from paradise. And then, according to the Bible, God granted Adam the power to rule over Eve, and all women. And that, at the heart of our culture in many ways has been playing out, that women were, and still are in many areas of the world, are dominated by men. Their right of speech has been taken away, their right to vote. We are still seeing mainly men in power positions. There are a few women around the world, where women are prime ministers. But also there, actually, it's a power over culture. And it is said about Margaret Thatcher, for example, that she was worse than most powerful men. So there's something about women who succeed in this patriarchal structure. They also have to be even harder than men in terms of power and domination and control. And there are some matriarchal cultures still around the world. It is also believed that there were matriarchal cultures 6,000 to 2,000 before Christ. And it's a very similar idea in these matriarchal cultures, in an unhealthy expression of them, that women ruled and dominated over men. And there are a few things in there around. So we don't know really what that looked like on a social structure way, but there are some reports that women ruled the house, that women would inherit like the house from their mother and pass it down to their daughters. So the inheritance kind of what was in the female lineage, that women also would make decisions in terms of governance and money. And also there are some reports that in some cultures women were allowed to marry two men, but men weren't allowed to marry two women, for example. So both of these cultures in their unhealthy expression are saying that one sex is more dominant and better or more powerful than the other sex. And so my deep curiosity and fascination really is this question, what the world would look like if those two sexes and all genders or non-gender conforming people really were equal in terms of power, were equal in terms of political decision-making, governance in terms of how we manage our resources, how we raise our children. For that, we need to do also our inner work, and we also need to do relational work, and it really has an impact on the way we communicate with each other, and the way we make love, and the way we collaborate. But there's also another aspect for me here around the sacred union, and that's also the sacred union between the old and the new. So it's also an exploration of how we can weave the era of AI and the new technologies that are coming at a fast rate, how we can weave that together with the ancient ways and what we need to incorporate from that time, how we can remember also the traditions of our ancestors. And I want to speak a little bit more about what we know from ancient cultures also in terms of partnership culture, in terms of egalitarianism. It's also really important for me to name here that these concepts, these ideas, these conversations, they're not just for you to receive, but they're for you to really participate and for you to feel impacted and to feel like you're taking something away that you can practically apply in your life. And for that reason, I also want to invite you to join an online community where we are going deeper into exploring some of these themes, into studying, learning, embodying different ways of being, and where you also get an opportunity to ask more questions to the guests that I'm inviting onto this podcast, and really, join not only the conversations, but it's really about embodying the sacred union in your own life and together with me. And so the sacred union journey, at the heart of this journey are 5 spirals that each kind of bring us deeper and higher into the sacred union. And the first spiral is about humanity's purpose. And I really want to share, on on a deeper level also maybe the understanding that I have of why we are here and how I've reached that understanding, and also to awaken a more planetary and galactic kind of consciousness, so that we really think about the human existence on this planet, bigger than just about humanity on Earth, but that we begin to understand or experience the Earth as part of a larger system in our galaxy. So it's about an expansion to understand a little bit more about, what's the purpose of Earth in the totality of our galaxy or the whole universe. And the second spiral is our soul purpose, our individual gifts, if you want to say so. But it's not only about the what we are here to do or what we are here to bring or why we are here, but it's also about the how, like how do we live our lives, how do we make decisions, how do we relate to ourselves. In the ancient Indian traditions, they would call this the Dharma and the Karma. And the third spiral is about embodiment. Whatever concepts we have or understanding or wisdom we have, as long as we don't live that wisdom through our body, through being really present and really aware with our actions, our thoughts, we haven't really done anything. So the purpose of our human existence could also be explained through just the experience of our body, through being really present with our senses and with our actions. And the fourth spiral is about relationships and eros. And so that's also a lot about how we then bring this understanding of a partnership culture really into the everyday experience of our relationships, of our sexuality. And also how do we bring that into not only the romantic relationships, but also the relationships with our friends and our family. And how do we relate to maybe the longing for a sacred union, a partnership, to also explore a little bit more about what is calling us and why is that calling us, and what's the meaning of being attracted to somebody, what's the opportunity here, as well as a deeper exploration of how do we evolve in this area, how do we level up, how do we really develop a greater capacity to love each other. And the fifth spiral is the spiral of interbeing or community or collaboration. For me, there are a few names that resonate here, but what that really entails is our political decision making, our economics, and also our collaboration within community structures and within or with the earth in many ways. So there's also an interbeingness with the more than human world, including also the spirits of the lands. And then we come back to the first spiral about humanity's purpose. And so we kind of spiral us through these different themes as a means to understand a little bit more about how we can really live a partnership culture and systemic transformation, and also how that these conversations and that body of work, like how that can maybe contribute to finding your life more meaningful, to finding hope in the midst of the global transformation and metamorphosis that the earth and our systems are in. And with that, I want to invite you on a little exploration of yourself. And if you're not driving, I'm inviting you maybe to close your eyes for a moment and connect with your breath. And take this moment as an opportunity to ask yourself the question, how would your life change if you knew exactly why you're here and what you're supposed to do here at this particular time? Maybe you notice that you already feel like you know your purpose and you know why you're here right now. You have a pretty clear understanding, and maybe there is a security or a rootedness, or maybe you're more on the opposite spectrum and actually you feel more anxious or quite far from alignment to your deepest purpose or your deepest truth, or maybe anywhere in the middle. And so there's no right or wrong answer. It's just about noticing how you relate to this question. And with that, I'm already inviting sort of a bigger question around how ready do you feel in terms of the planetary metamorphosis that we are going through, or the idea even that there could be another world war, or that our economic system is going to collapse, or that our ecological system is going to completely transform and change the way we need to live. Again, noticing how your body even responds when I ask these questions. Is there a sense of panic or fear, or is there like a numbing or shutting down, like this is so much to think about that you don't even know where to feel that or to allow that into your body? Or do you feel like aware of these transformations, these changes that are happening, and you're actually working with these questions quite a lot, and there's maybe not exactly a knowing, or you don't have all answers, but there is somehow a peace that you have found, or a security that comes from something deeper. And ultimately that these questions in some way already tie into also an exploration around our relationship to death, your own death, my death, and individual death, but also the death of the world as we know it, or humanity as a whole, and how we relate to that inquiry or that question. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. I've heard many people, when I start talking about systemic transformation, then many people are like, well, anyway, the sun is going to swallow the earth, and anyway, humanity won't last forever, and there's sort of a detachment in some way. And some other people are really upset about the idea that humanity maybe couldn't survive this, or that there's a loss or a grief or even a rage or a fear, potentially also shame that comes up. So these are really big themes, and I really sense also that we don't really allow ourselves in these conversations to engage with the emotional body, because it's so big. So giving yourself just a moment longer to feel what's there, and to allow also the emotional body to come into this conversation. And depending on where you're at, I'm inviting you also to resource yourself, maybe through touch, through becoming aware of your breath, through anchoring yourself in this present moment, through feeling also the gravity that is a very constant thing, like the sunrise and the sunset are very constant things. Gravity is a constant, something that we can hold on to. And from here, you can open your eyes again if you haven't already. And I'm now switching gears a little bit, and I want to share, who I am and how it happened that I'm here asking these questions and putting out this podcast in this way and this offering of a community. So maybe it's relevant to share that I grew up in Austria, which is a country that's part of the Western culture, part of the Western society. I was raised Roman Catholic, and I also was raised with the understanding that on these lands where I grew up, there was a war now about 80 years ago. And very horrible things happened to many people. And so I also grew up as a daughter of a nurse and a doctor. And I guess from a very small age, I had the awareness that life isn't forever, that death happens, and that many people regret a lot of their decisions and their choices, especially if they have lived a life, sort of worshipping the god of money. And I decided from a very young age that I wasn't going to do that I was going to be more free, and that I wanted to step out of the norms and the systems that we had created. And so I traveled when I was just 18 for about a year to New Zealand and Australia and Asia. And then I came back and studied marine biology and became a marine biologist. And I then later, in my late 20s, started working in the Maldives for IUCN, the International Union of Conservation of Nature, that you might be familiar with, as it's the organization that created the Red List of Endangered Species. And I had, in many ways, what you could call a dream life. I was free, away from the system. I was kind of in the service of the earth. I was diving in the most pristine coral reefs every day. And yet I was deeply lonely inside and, very disconnected from friends, very disconnected from myself in some way. And really longing for that sacred union, I guess, that deeper partnership. And I met somebody who at that time felt like the first man in many ways that I really deeply loved. And I loved him because he saw the world in so many ways like me. He was he had a heart so pure and so warm and loving. And he was at the same time also really different from me. And so I think that drew me also the capacity to manifest large amounts of money. He was one of the co-owners of one of the resorts where I was working. And he had a huge passion for environmental conservation and also systemic transformation. And so I gave my everything into this relationship, and overlooking a lot of blind spots, a lot of red flags. Things like he used to be an alcoholic, and he had 3 suicide attempts before we even met. And so it wasn't surprising that very quickly our relationship became really toxic and dysfunctional. And eventually I ended up sacrificing my career in some way to prove my love to him, which didn't work out, of course. And he ended up taking his life, which was such a shock to my system. Especially because also I had sacrificed so much of what I believed in, what I had hoped for, in the longing, in the hope that he'd heal and transform, and my love could heal him, that kind of stuff, and we would then save the world together. And so I ended up, feeling quite devastated. And I ended up actually in rehab for codependency, which was my first, deep encounter with myself, even though I had been in psychotherapy before. But it was such a radical move in many ways that life guided me to. And for about 7 months, I was in, full-time observation care, confrontation with my own shadows and with myself and how I had lived my life. And also, it was my first, even though maybe in many ways unhealthy, but still my first deep experience of circle work and community, and the power of community, and the power of being supported and held by a group of people. And as I came out, I became really curious in studying systemic transformation in many different ways, and discovered many conscious communities like Tamara in Portugal and Schumacher College in England, in Devon. And I visited both of these places, and actually then ended up staying in Devon many years later for about 6 months. And Schumacher College, it was a college for holistic science and for studying and learning systemic transformation. We explored things like the intersection between spirituality and science, for example, or what we can learn from nature about a healthy economy. And so all these studies really worked at the core of me. And I realized that there was no way back to my old ways. And eventually trained myself to become a relationship and sacred sexuality coach, and a tantric student and guide for others to dive more into Tantra as a modality to work with our emotions, to liberate ourselves from our shadows, from our heaviness, also from our trauma, and to invite more ecstatic, higher frequencies into our body. But I began to see that it's really difficult to truly heal our relational culture in a more broken culture. And in many ways, what we see in the macro, in the big culture, is also, informing the small culture, and vice versa in some ways. And so we could say that I observe in my work a lot of couples that are struggling with the concepts of power and money and sexuality. And I often see either very old, more patriarchal ways, where the man is the provider and the earner, and the woman is responsible for taking care of the children and the household. And then I see all sorts of very codependent patterns that emerge in that, of the woman giving herself up in some way, kind of like I did, and sacrifices her own soul purpose in some way, or her personality for the sake of the family. And then I also see maybe more contemporary arrangements where the woman takes on the role of the provider, and then also at the same time is the one who is pregnant and births the children, and somehow is then split in this desire to be close to her children, but she can't because she is needing to also provide the financial side. And I see the complexity in our relationships within the patriarchal paradigm that we still are in. And then it appears to me that most people, even though they are aware of climate change, but most of us are so busy and ingrained with our own, relational struggles and our relationship to our body and our relationship to work and how we bring in the money, that it's actually so big to even think about something as big as the earth and climate change and what we do. And because of that, there is not a lot of progress that we made or a lot of readiness in some way. I see most of us are actually not very ready for a systemic collapse, a collapse, for example, of the supermarkets and the food chain, which could happen, or a collapse of the financial market. And then, what happens to all of us in some way if that ever happens. And so for me, there's still like a degree of denial in our culture. At the time I lived at Schumacher College, I came across a paper written by Jem Bendel, who was a scientist and a climate, somebody who worked against climate change with the United Nations and all that. And he has then written a paper about exactly that denial, and has done a really good job, I find, in summarizing some of the scientific papers that are out there that speak about different versions of climate change and just how bad it actually is. And he proposes that there is a very high chance that we will experience societal collapse even in the next 20, 30 years, and potentially even a planetary extinction or an extinction of humanity, of our race. And it was the first time that I really started grieving maybe the world that I had expected to grow up in or to grow old in, that world in some way doesn't exist anymore, or is an illusion, is a fantasy. And so I was very gifted or blessed in that way, that I had that spaciousness to really allow myself to feel and to be held by others who also went through a similar process, and to come out of denial. But I also could observe that it actually threw me more into a depression and into a sort of a lethargy and a frozen state, that there was so much energy kind of trapped in my body that I didn't know, what to do with that or how to move forwards. It felt very confrontational, and maybe I would add like a sense of hopelessness or meaninglessness that kind of started spreading in my system. And out of that hopelessness, I started watching and researching or, engaging more with death as a concept. Obviously, I already shared that death wasn't an unfamiliar thing, since childhood. And then, of course, also through the death of my beloved, death was very close. I also lost an aunt to suicide and a teacher. And so I've already experienced many people that I dearly love dying. But this was about my own death and about my own mortality. And I started studying what other people shared about death, books that have been written about death and the art of dying. And I encountered a phenomenon called a near-death experience. So there is thousands of YouTube videos of people sharing their particular story of their own version of a near-death experience. There has been now several books written on that subject. And the interesting thing about all of these different stories is, one, how different they are, and two, how similar they are. So there's not one story that is the same in terms of all the details of their experience, but their similarities are similar in the sense of people seeing their body and not having the same attachment to their body, or living the experience from the body but from something else. So they all report having a different awareness but still being aware, but not from or through the body. And the other similarity is that usually they encounter something like a light or a frequency that feels very strongly like love to them. So there is a form of maybe safety or an experience of unconditional love that is more profound than anything that we have ever encountered here on Earth. I often heard stories also say that whatever they saw felt even more real than how we experience our own reality here. And then there are, different stories of like some people meet people that they have known in their life that talk to them, or they hear a voice, or they meet kind of angels or spirit beings that give them messages. A story that I also often heard is people being guided into a room where they kind of see all the different experiences that they have experienced in their lives. But the difference is that they don't just experience the experience through their own body, but also through the experience of other people that were part of that experience. And so they get to understand things that they have never understood before. They get to see the consequences of their own behaviors, or the impact that their words, their thoughts, their actions had on other people. And so it's a bit like, seeing what you have done well and what you have fucked up, basically, and what you can do better. And often they return with a specific message, or a deeper insight into how to continue living their life better. I also heard on numerous occasions that people who had cancer before and the cancer caused their death then woke up and miraculously were healed, and there was no cancer in their body. And I sometimes then fantasized about, this analogy in some way of, could it be that humanity is a bit like a cancer to the earth, and we need to go through a kind of collective near-death experience and then wake up, and our systems are going to be transformed in some miraculous way. The interesting thing for me here is that these stories gave me hope again. Maybe it is because I started believing in, things that we can't measure yet with science. Maybe the stories of unconditional love gave me hope, or the idea that there is something like a life after death, and that we are actually less mortal than we think we are. Maybe it was also the hope of hearing miracle stories, that filled me with like the idea of, well, what is if I could create miracles in the world, and I could create miracles in my own life.
You sold me out, I did not notice. It's been going on for a while. When grace is gone, I can see all things so clear. It was all pretend. I can find a higher line over the clouds above. I can find a higher ground. I just have to reach past the summit of the line to reach higher love.
And so I also really, want to lean into, the sacred union between life and death, and what we can learn from both, or how one cannot exist without the other in many ways, and our relationship to both. And this brings me back to the first spiral, the spiral of humanity's purpose, which has a lot to do with our relationship to death and life. And I want to say here that it's really important for me to name that I don't claim to have any answers here. I'm just sharing some of my insights, my experiences, and what I'm learning. I am a student of the tantric traditions and also of the trans-Himalayan teachings. And I went to a mystery school about 4 years ago that were very much teaching about the trans-Himalayan teachings and the transmissions, and connected a lot to humanity's purpose in the understanding of also understanding the purpose of the earth. And then I found myself a few years later in a mushroom ceremony, which was one of the most profound ceremonies of my life so far, where I in many ways encountered a lot of the things that I'm talking about here. And I kind of got to see humanity's purpose, in many visions, but also in my own embodied experience. And there were many different voices also sharing more on that subject with me. And, the essence of that, all that work comes back to this sacred union between divinity and matter. Another way of saying this is, how can we bring love as divinity, as a higher frequency, all the way down into matter, into our most human experiences, into our fear body, into our animal body, into nature. We know from nature that nature experiences or expresses love in a different way. There is prey and the predator. There is a lot of domination. There are very few animals that actually have monogamous relationships. So there's a great level of detachment. They don't have the same attachment that humans do have. And with that complexity of our attachments, there is a lot of shadow that comes with that. And so, for me, a deeper inquiry here is also, or a deeper desire here is for me to understand how we bring this divine essence, this high frequency of love, all the way into our truth, our animal nature, our shadows, our difficulties, our relationships, our sexuality. And what would that look like in terms of our social structures, in terms of our relationships, in terms of our political structures, in terms of the way we govern a country or govern land? Like, what is actually, if we really embody this high frequency of love that doesn't attach in the same way that we get attached, how do we bring this and embody this fully? And in order to do that, I think we first need to work with our attachment to our body and to life as it is. I really like one of the quotes from Bruce Lyon, who said, as long as we are here on this earth to survive, we are not in divine consciousness, we are not in soul consciousness, we are not in this deepest love. We are still in some way living in fear and protectiveness over our body or over something. And that's a quite, a tall order to really feel into what that deeply and truly means. But I think that's how far we need to go when we, want to talk about how we meet this planetary crisis and how we really stand for love in all its different expressions and ways. So that's my final words, my final share for this episode. And the next 4 episodes, I'm gonna share more on each of these spirals: the soul purpose, the embodiment, the relationships and eros, and the spiral of interbeingness or community or collaboration, and share a little bit more about what I really mean by that. And from then onwards, I'm gonna invite guests as part of this journey to explore, really how love flows in each of these different spirals, all the way down into a new paradigm that we all can create together. Before we part ways, I wanna invite you one more time to connect with your body. And you can do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed. And maybe if it feels comfortable or nourishing, then I'm inviting you to put your hands somewhere on your body where you feel you need a little bit of nourishment. Maybe it's on your heart or somewhere on your back. And just feeling that nourishment through your own touch. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, maybe feeling the nourishment through your breath. And from there, I'm inviting you to share, ideally out loud, 3 things that you are grateful for in this moment. I believe that everything around us is listening, and sometimes the air doesn't know that we are grateful for the breaths that we receive every day. And sometimes, our own body doesn't know that we are grateful to inhabit our body. And so I'm really practicing this on a daily basis to share our gratitude with the things that you feel inspired to feel grateful for. I am truly grateful for your time, your presence, your attention. That is such a gift at this time. And I'd also be really grateful if you'd like this podcast to give it a 5-star rating or a review or both. And if you want to take this a step further, there is 2 options for you. In the show notes, you will find a link to a 2-hour-long transmission of bringing your soul all the way into your body and connecting with some of the core masculine and feminine qualities, the healthy expressions of masculine and feminine. So it's a very low-key transmission of bringing your soul into the body. It's only £30. And that's the next step. And if you want to take this even a step further, on December 21st, winter solstice, we are launching a 1-year-long membership, a consciousness school, a mystery school on the 5 spirals of the Sacred Union podcast. So we are diving deeper into soul purpose, into embodiment, into love, eros, relationships from soul, into collaboration, into humanities purpose. And you can join 4 times a year at the equinoxes and the solstices, and the next portal that opens is on December 21st. So whenever you're listening to this, check out when the next portal opens. You can join 4 times a year, and then you journey for an entire year, and it will change your life. My life has already changed 100 times over since I launched this podcast, and I'm so grateful for your time. Until next time.